Hello, my friends. Today I want to talk about another topic of interest as I'm thinking back on our advocacy days on Capitol Hill, our advocacy week with our big lobby day on Capitol Hill, where many came into Washington to help me in the corridors of power in the House and Senate and even in the Capitol building itself, and many more sent in their emails and faxes and petitions and did social media action through Facebook and Twitter and so forth. But I think that we need a lot more discussion of the need for a solid U.S. foreign policy. We believe that it's an answer, literally an answer to our prayers, that we've seen some improvement on the part of the administration, where they actually realize that we must oppose our enemies and those of Israel, like the Islamic State in the Levant, ISIL. But we feel that this policy must be further shaped and refined and made solid, and that we must look ahead at the consequences of actions by the President, by the State Department, and most particularly by the Pentagon. Yes, we may have to act forcefully, but we need to think, what's next? What comes after an action that we take? And this is the reason for a need for a solid policy. And I'm usually talking to you about policy that affects the Middle East, the area all around Israel, or as it's called in this latest formulation, the Levant. And so, but I think we need to remember that today we are dealing with a global situation, a global conflict as never before. And several that I've heard and read have said we are launched on World War III. Now that's very difficult for any of us to get our minds around, because we went through, some of us, a little bit of World War II, then the Cold War. But to think about another global conflict, the mind wants to reject that. But we must know that, as it says in the scripture, there's a time for peace and a time for war. And woe to us if we think this is a time for peacemaking, when indeed it's a time for us to either wage war or at least to be strong in all the world, so that potential adversaries and enemies know that they don't want to engage us or trouble us. And in this respect, I remember that we have brought to Capitol Hill in recent weeks pace-setting initiatives that go beyond even the Middle East. And one of those was in response to the commentary that many have made that we may be back to a Cold War situation with Russia, as was the case with the Soviet Union 25 and more years ago. And in this respect, or for that matter, with respect to President Rouhani and the Ayatollahs of Iran, who want to threaten us and Israel with ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads, that is even more, that's either a Cold War or potentially a hot war. We need to say to them, we have tools, we have weapons in our diplomatic and economic and military stocks that we have not even mentioned yet. And just recently, at a top meeting of defense specialists, I mentioned some of the innovative ideas that we've brought out to the Congress in recent weeks. And I was pleased and surprised that they said, yes, that's what we have to think about. And what are we talking about? We're talking about going back, if need be, to the Jackson-Vanik Amendment, to the U.S. appropriations bills. And what that meant was that there would be no fair trade, there would be no open trade of the Soviet Union with the United States or for that matter with the West, until the Soviet Union mended its ways and abided by international norms, stopped oppressing its people, stopped occupying its neighbors, stopped threatening world war. And the other part of that was to bring back the full-fledged Helsinki Treaty inspections and reporting. Under the Helsinki Treaty, there were public and private inspections of what the Soviets were really doing, and then complete transparent reporting so that we could know how to apply that Jackson-Vanik Amendment and when, if at all, we could free up the trade with Russia, or with the Soviet Union in that day, and let the Soviet economy come out of the stale, cold situation in which it had been for many decades. And last but not least, when President Reagan came in, before long, he brought out something that just shocked everyone, including some of his own staff. He said, we are going to have anti-ballistic missile defenses. We're not going to rely on mutually assured defenses, kind of a standoff in which you have nukes and I have nukes, and so long as you don't use them, I won't use them. He said that's not satisfactory any longer. We have to have anti-ballistic missile defenses so we really can defend our people and not just depend on the rationality of our enemy that he won't destroy us because he doesn't want to be restrained or destroyed himself. And think about it. Today, mutually assured destruction will not work. So even more today, with the likes of the Iranian regime particularly, but also on some days I think with President Putin and the Soviet military, mutually assured destruction may not be enough. And why do I say this? Because there are a number of mentions under the radar, unreported by most of the media, that specialists and experts in Russia are talking, yes, they're talking and writing about using tactical nuclear weapons against what we used to call the Central European states, those states of the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine. And if there's some ideologue who's aligned with President Putin who can talk about those things, the next step is like back in the late 1930s, someone in government, military or executive like President Putin, who will be tempted to do it. So we must have robust anti-ballistic missile defense systems for America, that is all of continental America, also for our bases and interests abroad, and for all of, let's call it, Central Europe, for all those nations that are threatened, Ukraine, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Moldavia, and more. And by the same token, that will serve not only as a salutary pushback against President Putin, who likes to invade and is invading his neighbors, but also against President Rouhani and the Ayatollahs, who don't know yet whether we're serious or not. So these are strong words, my friends. We're not going to do all of this anytime soon, and we may not do all of it at any time in our lifetime, but we have to be ready for whatever actions are necessary that can, whatever promises, shall we say, or commitments that are necessary to show the dictators and the radical Islamists of this world that we're serious and we won't entertain another march to folly as happened in the late 1930s that brought on World War II. Serious thoughts, but think about this, and we'll talk more next week. Thanks again. Goodbye.